Long ago, the Trinity gazed at the creation and pondered upon a means by which they could save the lost. A means by which they could bring the dead back to life and to ensure that death would cease forever. To complete this task, Satan had to be snared. To achieve this, someone had to enter hell and snare him. This would mean being cut off from life. To go there, you have to truly die. The hardest part would be finding or establishing a way back. Whoever went took the risk of never being able to return, until perhaps the last day. The risk was enormous, the suffering would be terrible, but the reward was beyond value. The Holy Spirit accepted the task. When they looked at him, it turned out that his past already contained this course. Of the two versions of the Holy Spirit on earth, it was the younger who would have to go, the one with the least experience. This was because the path already existed. It was also discovered that this soul had been sentenced to hell for a crime, but the details of that are to remain secret, at least for a time, except to say that his sentence was served and the crime no longer counts against him. They were troubled. They didn't want to send him without some means of protection. They decided to send him with great authority. I'm not sure which incarnation of the Spirit took the first step on this path. I do know that the one who went, the younger Spirit, had already lived as Moses and Elijah at the least. For some reason, I feel moved to call him Elijah during the story. Picking a name will make the storytelling more natural. I'm unsure if it was as Elijah that he went. I'm going to begin this story with the end, because I want you to be comforted. So let me tell you the story of Elijah's journey into death and his time in hell. At last he'd acquired the power he needed. It had taken a great span of time, but he could finally make the attempt. He focused his mind and began the process of ascension. He felt his being move. It was an upwards motion, and he was leaving his body behind. He gained momentum and continued to rise, but something went wrong. There was a drag upon him. Something was holding him back. If he didn't act quickly, he could fail in his attempt and lose everything. He looked at his being and saw a great symbol of power within himself. He didn't understand. It looked incredibly important and extremely valuable, but there was no mistaking the fact that this was causing the resistance. He tried to salvage it, but had no choice. In the end, he let it go. A strange thing happened. A shadow of the symbol detached from the real symbol, and as he left it, the resistance disappeared. He could escape. He was going to make it, and the symbol of power was still with him. He regretted leaving the shadow symbol, but rejoiced as he breached the barrier and completed his ascension into the light. Upon reaching this new level, he was struck by understanding. Suddenly it was clear to him that all things were one, and that he had committed terrible crimes. He was filled with grief. He wailed with sorrow, and approached the other beings, confessing his crimes. They sought to comfort him, but he could not be consoled. A great span of time passed before he decided to take the symbol to the Master. The Master recognized it and took him to the Father, and the Father instructed him on how he should return it to the Son. This was done, I believe, during the life of the Baptist. Now then, to the beginning. The younger Spirit was in an incarnation when he had a dream. He found himself in a garden of great beauty and tranquility. Wandering in the garden, he came across a strange symbol hovering in place. The area had clearly been prepared for it and seemed designed to keep it. He approached and reached out to touch this staggeringly beautiful object. When he touched it, the symbol vanished, and a great clamour arose in the garden, the sounding of an alarm. He awoke in shock and went on with his life. From this point on, we'll call him Elijah. In a later life, he had a little sister whom he loved very much. One day it was his responsibility to care for her, but he left the room briefly to carry out a task. It wasn't long before he heard her screams. He rushed back to her and found that she'd fallen into the fire. He pulled her away, but she was badly burned, and her hands became unusable. Torn with grief, he could not forgive himself, even though nobody else blamed him, and he had her forgiveness. They loved each other very much. Elijah loved her to such a great extent that he resolved to dedicate his life to bring her healing. He searched for a means to heal her, and eventually found a healer who restored her hands. Having done this, he realized that it wasn't enough. He determined to find a way to prevent the accident from happening in the first place. He decided to seek out a way to go back to the past and save her from her suffering. It took a great span of time, but eventually he learned of a man who claimed he could create a portal into the past. He met with the man, and they made an arrangement. When Elijah returned, there was a portal the size of a doorway in the man's office. It was pitch black. The man motioned to him to approach the portal and assured him that it would take him back in time. As it turns out, he wasn't lying. He was attempting to send Elijah into Satan's kingdom. For if you are sent this way into that kingdom and enter it, you are born again as a mockery of life. This has happened many times on earth, and the people come back and make inside jokes about having been born again, knowing that the Lord's sheep do not understand. It's one of the conditions of being cut into their plan. As it happens, the man had made a miscalculation, and this portal went far, far away into the past. Elijah examined the portal, but for obvious reasons was hesitant. He decided to test it. He threw odd objects into the portal and tried to remember if he had seen them in the past. He couldn't remember them. The man made impatient noises and made it clear that this was Elijah's only chance to go. Elijah steeled himself, hesitated, and then walked through. It was immediately obvious that this was a trick. He was approached by a being that explained to him that he had died and that he couldn't go back. He was determined to return, but there was no way. He was shown where it was that he would have to incarnate, and he was devastated. It was a terrible place. He was filled with sorrow because he knew that his family would never know what had become of him. And here, his prospects looked slim indeed. That's it for part 1. All the best.